You know what? I can see you now. When I hid that little thing at the bottom of my slide, I see Michaela Kiner's face. Thank you.
Oh,
so now I
good
see
job.
people, and there you go. And I see that. Oh yeah, there you go. Thank you. Lindsay's like, okay, good, Robin. All right. So what I've been doing when I've been doing these presentations, although I see the strip at the bottom though, which is kind of weird. That might be in the way of some of the slides, but I like to just give you a little bit of history of where, from my perspective, ID&E has come and is going. And I'm not gonna drain all of this. This is for you to have afterwards and look at, and you can add your own perspective to it and thoughts, but it gives you a sense of a timeline for where ID&E has come from, and then kind of circles around to this moment that we're experiencing with the DEI attacks. And really the term and everything that's super positive that we've done has been co-opted. And it's been co-opted in a very strategic way to drive a wedge between people who believe in the power and beauty of inclusion, diversity, and equity, and making sure everyone has access to opportunities, to jobs, to growth, to development, to have a voice, right? Nothing more than that. It has never been about disenfranchising people, or it's never been about creating advantage of some groups and disadvantage for others. It's always been about really uncovering the beautiful dimensions of diversity people have to be more creative and innovative in how we do our work, solutions we create for our customers, for our teammates, that kind of thing. It's always been about that. But there's been a wedge strategically used to maintain political power, to maintain privilege and that kind of thing. So, and what's interesting is the piece that I'll spend just a little time on, and then we'll move quickly because you can have a chance to look at this, is that these attacks, this isn't the first attack. It happens on a cyclical basis, and it's normally associated with times of strength and growth. So of late, there was a big jump in the amount of folks understanding that we should think about this as a systemic problem, institutionalized problem with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, all of those kinds of events. It sparked a big backlash. And because of that, the power needed to be realigned again. And so you saw a major backlash. Same thing happened actually back in 1921. If folks remember, after slavery ended and Black communities were beginning to thrive, and there was a particular, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was literally a community there that had thriving Wall Street businesses. There was generational wealth being created. There was happiness. There was vibrancy. And one little incident that was made up and manufactured sparked the Tulsa riots and massacres. And that was the way of the entrenched system to realign itself. And you saw that again in the civil rights movement, and you're seeing it with Ahmaud Arbery and the death, like I talked about. So just keep this in mind. And then our task, and why I put that image is, everyone on this call and what I'm going to talk about is resistance through unity, courage, and empathy, right? It's being intentional in what we do, but it's being smart in how we do our intentionality. It's resilience, it's hope, all these things, which may seem like words just thrown on a page, but I believe them. And we need everyone on this call, Michaela, to believe this, that we do have to reframe the false narrative and take back the definition and belief of what ID&E is all about, and reframe that. And that's what I'm going to talk about here going forward. So hopefully this is useful for folks to maybe think about, use, and take it and use it however you want to use it, is what I would say. All right, so here we go. Perfect. So one of the things that I wanted to do really quickly is, and again, I found in some of these talks that I do, what's changed for me as an ID&E professional, leader, and champion. Let's make it personal. Let's make it, let's make it real for where I sit. Because what I found when I do this, probably everybody on this call, because you're drawn to this type of topic, have probably experienced some of these same things and some of these same fears and sense of dread and hope and all this kind of stuff that's happening right now with because of the attacks we have. So for me, there's been constant worry and discussions around this work, those doing this work and how to push back. I can't tell you how many meetings I have either as group meetings or individual meetings or presentations I've done in the last 3-4 months. It is nonstop. And there's strength in that, and you get this sense of community and everything from doing those. But it also just reinforces the dread, and sometimes it makes you think that there's so little I can do on a larger scale. So what do we do? And so we've often talked about, work within your communities and get other people to work within their communities. And the more communities we have working on this, by helping one another, by being vigilant, by sharing, best practices, by doing this, the more we have these pop up all over the country, the more that we have kind of a groundswell pushback against this wedge that's being forced. So, and look, it's anxiety, it's pain, it is sometimes disillusionment and disheartened. Sometimes there's hope and fire, right? And that's all real. And if you feel it, that's just what it is. The other thing I've experienced too, because people ask this all the time, is all the companies bailing and running and turning their backs on it. No, not at all. I have 2 really amazing clients that I'm dealing with right now. I did 2 presentations for Costco in the last month and a half. They are out front, and they are talking, and they're visible, and they are pushing back. They're one of those companies that decided to hit this head on and run, simple, like Apple. And I have another client that is under the radar, has changed a lot of what they visibly say, but that doesn't mean that they haven't strayed from the course. They're just trying to get out of the crosshairs of the Trump administration. So they're quiet. And I can tell you it's a super large company, and I think I'll leave the name out of it for now, but it's the largest of its kind in the industry it's in. And so I have an amazing opportunity to help shift how all their leaders think. And it's super cool to be able to push people in the inclusive leadership. And what they're pushing towards is human-centered culture. And the HR function is going to be in charge of owning and disseminating a human-centered approach. So why wouldn't I want to do that? That's an incredible opportunity to do. So, but one of the things we have to do also is you have to be sharper and more intentional with your messaging. You have to understand their arguments and the arguments that they're making on the other side. You've got to be able to fight against false claims of meritocracy, or the fact that there's no privilege, or we're giving advantage to certain groups. You have got to be really spot on. And I realized that I had to be sharper and clearer about how I make those arguments. And then the other piece that I've found is we're circling back to the damn business case. We shouldn't have to be worried about the business case, but we have to circle back. And what I put on the screen are a couple talking points that I hope everybody on this call uses. Diversity isn't about giving advantage to certain groups. We've got to understand that. It's never been. It's about creating access. It's about leveraging all the differences to be more creative and innovative in how we do our work, right? And we have to drive this home. So this is what I've been experiencing. Talking the business case, sometimes I sit in my pain and I feel like crap. And sometimes I'm just out there and fighting and doing this, and every bit of those emotions are real and true and viable. So if that's how you're feeling, all good. So I have a friend of mine, and Robin Hendrickson knows him, and I think Michaela knows him as well, but Ephanus Henderson, and he's been in this work forever. He was in this work, I think, 15 years before I started, and he used to be the head of diversity and inclusion for Weyerhaeuser. And he's put together a wonderful presentation on this topic, and I've cut a lot of his slides into the back part of the presentation and the extra slides. I'm not going to cover them today, but it's a wealth of resource for everybody, because he really talks about what were the causes of this, what's their main strategy, how do you speak to white men, how do you address what they're dealing with, right? What's their experience? So he's got some incredible slides to look at. And these are 2 that I pulled up and made into one slide when he talks about effective engagement strategies, which is part of what Michaela wanted me to talk about. And I'm not going to drain every bullet in this, but I just want to get it up there. And you can see this. He talks about empathetic listening. So it's, showing a general and genuine interest in people, right? And what their perspectives are, clear communication. And it's addressing the misconceptions that are and the misinformation that's out there. So we have to be clear. Storytelling, and you're going to see this even on the slides that my next slide, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what's my perspective on what I add to this, right? When you story tell, we've got to humanize the stories. You can't just use data and expect the data to, even though it's probably wonderful, empirically driven, meets 0.01, significance, whatever you want to say, right? The more we are able to take the stories and humanize them and create an understanding that these are people that are experiencing this. They're not just data on a chart, right? So keep that in mind. Open dialogue. We got to foster the kind of environment where people who want to have a conversation can have them. Not everyone's going to want them. Not everyone's going to listen or want to stop and believe they just want to believe what they believe. In-group pressure to stay in the in-group is big. And you have that in-group, out-group dynamic thing that just forces people to stay in their groups because it's safer, it's easier, and they don't want to be ostracized outside of their group. They don't want to be caught in the middle. So create open dialogues for those who want to have open dialogue. And collaboration and involvement. Get involved within your communities, right? Share best practices. Go to a rally, right? Just talk to people in your community. Those kinds of things. These are things that he talked about in terms of engagement strategy. And there was a very specific call out that I just put on the screen for you to see, and you can get this later. Collaboration within the community, because that's the direction that's being suggested by lots of organizations. It's just do your thing in your community. It feels too daunting to try to solve it on the national level or international level. And truth be told, it's not here in the US that this kind of wedge is happening. It's everywhere, right? So, but within your community, you can have an impact. Share knowledge. Make sure that people understand that there's a unity and purpose. You have joint initiatives. Amplify your voice. Find ways to bring your voice up however you feel comfortable, but just use your voice. And then support networks. Lean on community for advice and encouragement, people around you. I have a wonderful neighbor just a few houses from mine who's a woman from Germany, and she and her family grew up. She was afterwards, but through the whole Hitler era. And so she has a very strong just gut and heart reaction to authoritarianism and everything. And this woman's at rallies every weekend. She is sending us notes. She's sending us articles. She's sending us, cutouts and data and everything. She understands what's at stake. So tap into those networks. So, and this is all F.N.S. Henderson, and I put his link to his website there so you can take a peek at it afterwards. All right. Now, a few of my thoughts, and I know I'm racing through this because I want to get to the point of having a conversation and dialogue. But if you do have a hot and burning question, put it in the chat window, and then I'll notice it, or one of Michaela or one of her staff folks will. We can do that too. So a few of my thoughts. As I said a moment ago, you don't have to engage every time. So if people come to you and they want to talk with you about it, and you just feel overwhelmed and down and you don't want to do it, you know what? It is perfectly okay to say, you know what? I don't feel like I have the energy to talk about it. So you can opt out. And then folks on this call, give them space. Let them know that that's okay to do. They'll circle back when they're ready. We've got to take back the definition of ID&E, and we have to make sure that everyone's doing it. We hold people accountable for it. And it doesn't have to be mass efforts. It could be one conversation, one debate, one disagreement to wrestle back this whole notion of ID&E, right? And really pushing that business case rationale I said before. But honestly, we need to be willing to punch back when necessary, right? At a minimum, be tempered radicals. And Deborah Meyerson wrote this great book, and I have it as a reference in this slide deck. And it's called Tempered Radical. And she changed the name to Rocking the Boat because Tempered Radical book came out right around 9/11, and there was a negative reaction to the title. So she changed it to Rocking the Boat. And she has a couple images in there that actually are a mainstay throughout my entire book. And I connected with Deborah and I talked with her about it. We're friends and that kind of thing. So two of the things that she talks about is we have to be willing to rock boats and rock it hard, but not so hard that you don't keep yourself and others in the boat, because you can't affect change if you're out of the boat, right? So there are times, even in my book and her book, where you say sometimes you do have to rock the boat hard enough, knock yourself out, and and be good with it because it's so egregious. But where you can rock it hard in everything you do, but keep in the boat, that's how you help affect change. And that's something that's summarized in my book quite a bit and weaves through. The other analogy or thing she talks about is dropping pebbles which cause ripples. So I think what best way to do this work right now is not try to push a boulder up the hill, do 3 big things that change everything, because the minute you let go of that boulder, it runs your butt over. It just does. But if you drop a pebble that causes a ripple, and I get Michaela to drop a pebble that causes a ripple, but her ripple causes Robin Hendrickson to drop a pebble and cause a ripple, and then hers causes Kim Hart, who I now see on the call, causes her, causes a ripple. It's the aggregation of all of those pebbles and ripples that lead to systemic and organizational change and cultural change, right? Those pebbles are your actions, your activities, your behavior, how you engage with people, how you go about engaging with people. Those are the pebbles. And the more we get other people to drop them, you can see it just adds up. It adds up. And that's how I've run diversity teams for decades. Is the whole notion of dropping pebbles would cause ripples, as opposed to the 3 big things we're going to do to change, retention issues at Microsoft or Amazon, right? It doesn't work that way. So do that. Think about that. Be loud, be visible. Vote with your wallet. Ask Target and Tesla if voting with wallet doesn't hurt, right? They both have taken a wrong side of history, I think, and they're paying for it financially. Right? Spend your dollars on companies like Apple, Costco, but also, more importantly, minority-owned businesses. And for me, for the brevity of the words on the slide, minority to me means Black and brown-owned businesses, women, LGBTQ-owned businesses, businesses started by people with disabilities, veterans, everything, right? You try to find those kinds of businesses and take the time to spend money with them. That's how you vote with your wallet, right? And find out what companies are doubling down on DEI while flying under the radar. Don't get mad at them. They're surviving. And they're still doubling down on the work. They're just not calling it. One of my client, the big client I won't say the name about, they used to have an ID&E team and DEI team. Now they're people impact. And so it's just what you do to survive, right? So keep that in mind. And then here's 2 points, which is really interesting. If you think of all the kinds of things that are coming out of the Trump administration, the executive orders and all that kind of stuff, they're attacking race, they're attacking gender identity, primarily as their big focal point, as if that's all diversity's ever about. And what they're leaving alone, because it's so legislated in the government, are veterans and people with disabilities. And they don't have as much ground to go after them, because they will lose in the courts if they do that. So what you should think about if you do this work is those are 2 dimensions of diversity. You can enter this discussion and work. So create a veterans program and think about intersectionality. Create a people with disabilities program and think intersectionality. So in other words, don't just think of people as being disabled. Think about Black disabled people, Black and brown disabled people, veterans who are disabled. So you can start using intersectionality under the guise of people with disabilities or veterans. And it may stay under the radar and you can get the work done, and you're still going to accomplish the same thing. You're just making veterans and people with disability primary. Does that make sense, everyone? Hopefully it does. So that's just a way for us to get into, be able to do this work. The other piece that I'm going to encourage you strongly, and actually on my website, I have a webinar that I did with Cody Horton, that's a name that I throw out because a lot of people on this call will probably know Cody. And he interviewed me, and I talked about the intersection of privilege and meritocracy, and there are several segments on it. And it's just in my website, it's listed in my information in the back. It's just eddiepate-speaking.com, but it's in there. You have to understand the notion of privilege, and you have to understand the notion of meritocracy and how to push back. Because from a mental model standpoint, what's undergirding a lot of the pushback, the pushback on DEI or ID&E is this false perception of what privilege is, and the fact that to them meritocracy is real when it's not real. It's an aspiration, it's a thought, it's a hope, but it does not exist in our society. The minute we have any biases that people agree to, meritocracy is no longer valid, right? Because some people are treated differently because of who they are. It's not based on merit anymore. It's based on skin color, gender, whether they're disabled, their language abilities, their cultural background, right? Any number of things. In different countries, it means different things. Different religion in India, there's going to be a bias for. If you're in Japan, there may be levels, and you know, whether you're the top level, middle level, lower levels of society where you're born into those levels, right? That all matters. So it's that negates meritocracy, right? And and the connection is, if you acknowledge that privilege exists, you debunk meritocracy, so they'll never do that, right? And so you've got to understand that connection, people, because that's where some of the battle happens. All right. Now, Michaela said, I want Eddie to answer 3 questions. So I'm going to quickly do 3 questions, and then that gets towards, and then I'm going to do a sprint through some tips that she wanted me to do, and then we'll stop, and then we should have the rest of the time to answer questions and just talk. So what Michaela wanted me to do is talk about what language can and should we use when talking about inclusive leadership, and I also added, and how we use that language matters. So the first part, excuse me. I think I'm going to start the hiccups again. If I do, I apologize. Calling in versus calling out. Communicate in a way that doesn't create defensiveness, but creates moments of learning. If you call people out constantly, they become defensive and you no longer make progress. Sometimes you have to call them out because they're just being jerks, right? And it's consistent or really egregious. But work on calling people in by using curious questions to ask, excuse me, why they felt the way they did, right? And create learning moments. Be open and willing to listen. Be firm and intentional, but humanize our discussions, okay? And so that's how you use the language. It's important on how you go about it. Inclusive leadership language is express the sincere belief in things that really are super important. Inclusion, equity, vulnerability, empathy, compassion, belongingness. That's the love language, if you will, of an inclusive leader. That's how you lead inclusively. They're not soft skills that don't mean anything. They're really incredibly important things to keep in mind. Of course, now my hiccups have come, and I really do apologize, everyone, for this. And I knew they would hit. Use intersectionality to your benefit in how we speak, the examples we use. So in other words, excuse me, if you're asked to give examples of stuff, don't always just use race or gender as examples. Think about language abilities. Think about cultural background. Think about your family status, your thinking style, your working style. It's not to negate the importance of race and gender. By far, they have the most power, and it's called a superordinate status characteristic in sociology. That's my PhD stuff coming out. But think about changing what examples you use, so we don't trigger with race and gender and sexual, gender identity or sexual orientation. Use insightful data to your advantage, right? But you can't just use data alone. You've got to find ways of becoming a great storyteller with those data, so you can humanize the story and put faces and families behind it. And I didn't put it here. Use your data to raise the discussion from the single individual face-to-face thing to systemic issues. Everyone has crap they face in their life. They'll be able to point to, my cousin Benny wasn't able to get a job and is on welfare. I get it. So, but when you start raising that away from the individual level, think systemically of entire populations and people based off of race or gender or what location or whatever, having 10 times, 100 times the problem that cousin Benny's having. So raise the discussion to systemic levels, use your data to do that, and humanize it. Spend your privilege, everyone. It's super important. Use your ordinary, everyday privilege that you have to create visibility for people or opportunities for people. Good example of that is if you're someone who often is asked to speak and you speak in groups or in meetings or something, why don't you have someone who normally doesn't speak come in and speak for you, not for you, but they do the speaking and you create visibility for them and you support them. It's amazing we do so. That's just one example of spending your privilege to help others. And that's inclusive leadership. That's what inclusive leaders do. Speak with passion and inspiration. And Robin will laugh because she's heard me say this probably 100 times over the course of my career. Call a duck, right? Be intentional. Don't say duck's not a waterfowl, man. It's a duck. Tell it how it is. Be authentic in how you talk about it, right? Don't sugarcoat it, but do it in a way that's calling in, or compassionate empathy. So that's what inclusive leaders talk about. And there's probably more, but I thought that that would be an important piece to bring up. Do we, Michaela wanted me to talk about talk differently when addressing internal versus external audience. Honestly, it depends. It really completely depends on the company and where they are, and there just isn't one set answer to this. So like if you're Costco or Apple, no, you talk to internal audience that you the same way you talk to internal audiences, right? You're clear, you're authentic, you're open. But if you're a company that's flying under the radar, like this other client I have, yes, you don't talk to external audiences like you do internal audiences, right? You don't post social media posts on presentations I'm doing, or do that kind of thing. So yes, you do. You have a different strategy, but you have to always be aware of who's listening too, right? So be careful what you communicate to your organizations. You should communicate a lot, but just understand whatever you put out there into your organizations will get out, right? And here's the other thing too, is just because it looks like a company's backpedaling, it doesn't mean they are. It just means that they're flying under the radar to stay in business, to stay doing what they do, and they don't want to be just in the media all the time doing this. So give people a break until you truly understand if they're backpedaling and running oppositely hard in the other direction, or if they're just trying to make sure that they can still do this work. All right. The final question that Michaela wanted me to just quickly address is, how can people leaders support our teams given the amount of uncertainty in the workplace? So people leaders, everyone, in fact, everyone on this call is a people leader, right? It just is. Really own the topic. You have to know what we're talking about. Like I said earlier, you got to crisp up exactly what the arguments are, what we know, and find your voice and support it with power and inspiration and wisdom and insight, right? And hold others to that standard. People leaders need to be visible on the issue. I do think you do have to be visible as you can, right? People draw energy from folks. They want to know if Robin or Michaela are doing their thing, if they're staying visible with this. Having this kind of call and putting it out on LinkedIn, perfect. Just being visible. Really listen and lead with your ears. I think leaders have to know and understand that. You don't always have to be talking, but you always have to be listening. As I said, make sure there's a consistent, powerful messaging that all key players have and are accountable for. Consistency in message and actions. Excuse my language. No bullshit. We've got to be authentic and real. If you say something, do something. So do what's right, not what's expected, right? And that's the message, consistency. And then I told you, say over and over again that whole, ID&E is not about creating advantage. For certain groups, it's about creating advantage. It's about leveraging diversity differences to be more creative and innovative, right? That's what we have to do. This is what people leaders need to be doing, in my opinion. And there are probably other things to do, but if you do these six things, we have an advantage, and we'll start winning in the space. So quickly, some practical tips. In fact, maybe what I'll do is, since I'm gonna get these out, and a lot of them are pretty explained in my book, and then they're pretty self-explanatory. When you see something like this, you see what I mean. But all the things that are in the last part of this presentation they come from my book. They're what I call inclusive pebbles that I talked to you about, things that you can do that cause ripples, and it's all about the daily practices of inclusive leaders. And so, and there's the book website. You can order it there. You can order it at Amazon, or whatever you order books from. If you want to do it, they're Audible books, everything. This is not a big sales pitch. If no one buys the book, that's great. I just want you to be aware that I think it's a pretty good resource to go to and get some of these things out that we're talking about. Look, there are simple pebbles like this. Be aware of the danger of the single story, of thinking and judging individuals, even like white men, right? They're not a single, one-dimension kind of thing. We've got to find ways to do that. So to be careful about the dangerous single story. I talked to you about calling in, calling out, using curious questions, spend your privileges. I talked about. There's some really cool notions about who's in your kitchen. And in other words, who are you engaging with? What's your social network? Make sure it's well-rounded and you just aren't listening to voices who agree with everything you say. Martin Luther King used this civil rights day. He's the one who coined this term because he wanted to make sure whoever was in his kitchen will help him be the kind of civil rights leader he needs to be. So think about that kind of stuff. Ask this question a lot. Is that truly problematic or is that just different? So there's a bunch of stuff like that I have in here, and there's a video that I don't think we'll have time to look at right now. I'd rather answer questions from people. And so I think what I'll do is let's stop here, and I'll finish with this later. But I'll stop, take a breath. I'll hiccup in your ears a couple more times. But what questions do people have? What burning thoughts? Just your reaction. Put it in the chat window, or if you're going to let people come off mute and speak, that would be great too. But what do folks think? What are your thoughts about all the stuff I just quickly rammed down your throats?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And people are welcome to come off mute. If you can, maybe virtually raise your hand. Okay, I see Vince. Go for it.
So first of all, thank you very much. By the way, this was amazing, and I'm glad that we're talking about this now. And I do want to kind of understand a little bit. So as you may or may not know, Target's former DEI said, oh, we don't have to worry about this anymore because it's trained, right? So we don't have to have a DEI program because now it's ingrained in everything we do. And I have a feeling that I'm also going to get that pushback as an HR leader. And I'm curious how we kind of rebut that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is just understanding what the value of ID&E is not enough. Now, if Target can come back and say, we have it actually integrated into every aspect of our systems, our structures, our policies, then peace. Then maybe they truly don't have to have a dedicated ID&E team. It could be because it actually is in the fabric of the organization. I have failed to see any companies to date who have completely integrated the work in. So what I would push back to people and say, yes, there's one thing that's different. There's one aspect of this if it's understood what it is. We have employee resource groups. We have, activities we're doing. We celebrate Juneteenth. We do that, all that kind of stuff. That's one thing, but is it literally embedded within the systems is what I would suggest that you push back and ask. And then the other thing that I would say to them is there are 5 generations of people in the workplace now, 5 different generations, and they all have different ways that they think about this work and why we're doing this and how they value companies. And the way that people handle diversity who are people my age, I'm 61, and I think I'm right on the cusp of being a boomer, but whatever, that's okay. I'll live with that. And so how we've handled diversity stuff is very different than what Gen X or millennials or Gen Z, and I don't think we have alphas in the workplace yet, but soon. So the work, in other words, isn't stagnant. The work is not meant to have a finish line. It's meant to continue to grow and adapt and keep us aware of what we have to do to make all the differences come together. Does that make sense? Right? If you stop now, all the different nuance and different perspectives and stuff are just being negated. The beauty of diversity is we should be leveraging those to even be better and better and better for our customers ongoing. Does that make sense to everyone? So that's how I would talk about it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure, Vince.
That's great. Thanks, Eddie. We have a thank you from Christina and a question. Can you explain why you use ID&E versus DEI?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And people always ask that. And so I value and want to make paramount or most important the notion of inclusion. So I want to put inclusion first. It's not to negate the work on diversity, but what Robin will tell you when she was on my team a while ago is I talked to everybody that 30% of the work we do is diversity work, 60% or so is work on inclusion, and so the final percentage of the work is about assessing and making sure we're doing what we need to do. You could have a lot of amazing diversity that you bring into an organization and have there, but that doesn't mean inclusion is happening. having a seat at the table is not good enough anymore. People need to be seen and heard and have voices. That's where the inclusion comes in, and inclusion leads to belonging. And you can't even get to inclusion if you don't have empathy. So the whole pathway is empathy to inclusion to belongingness. So it hyper focuses on inclusion. It makes equity kind of the sandwich of what we're trying to do, the end game. And diversity is important, but that's the finite piece, right? We have certain amount of diversity we bring in an organization. Now, how are we including it, and how are we making sure that it's actually all this lovely diversity has equitable experiences? So it just allows me to focus in on inclusion being primary.
That's great. Thank you. I know some people probably have to drop off, but we're here for, call it another 5 minutes. Any other questions or comments?
Oh, bye, Kim. She had to go.
Mhm.
All right. Oh, whoops, excuse me. There must be other thoughts, any impressions of anything, things you're dealing with?
Yeah, Colleen,
So-
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi there,
Hey,
Eddie. You
Colleen.
probably don't remember me, but we met like
I
through EDI. You were one of my facilitators in our program on leading change, and you talked about believing is seeing. So anyway, just wanted to say I've
do remember you.
been a long time fan
Yeah.
and appreciator of you, and loved how you brought in the context. First of all, like the session you led for EDI was on leading change. And I think that's how you started, with seeing the pattern of the cyclical nature of progress, basically, and backlash.
Yes.
So we have to be resilient and ready for that. I love that. And I loved how you talked about the intersectionality of privilege and meritocracy that, lit up and a light bulb for me, because I know the two concepts, but I didn't think about it in terms of the direct correlation.
It's important.
For sure. Anyway, and then, I just love the practicality of everything you said too. So I just wanted to give a big yay and thanks for that.
Thank
Out of
you.
appreciation for so many of these concepts. You rattled off very quickly, but they are deep.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. And but I appreciate how you brought it up, like just the pebbles, the ripples, how we just get through things, right? It's so key. So anyway, thank you.
Colleen, thank you. It's wonderful. I appreciate the feedback. The feedback is wonderful, and reach out to me. One of the slides I have, maybe I'll just go to this. Is I'll put my contact information up. I mean, I encourage anyone and everyone to hit me up on LinkedIn. Send me an email. Shoot me a text. Right. And Colleen, if you want to get together and talk about something or something like that. Robin, you and I need to go have our root beer date like we used to have. We got to do that. So, but just get a hold of me. And then the thing that I'll say to people here is like, look, this work does take courage. And I mean, everyone who's on this call, we got to have the courage to stand up to resist, the courage to just listen to different perspectives, but also have the courage to, every once in a while, you got to poke them back in the eyeballs. Is not physically. I'm not advocating violence, but just I think you know my reference, right? Excuse me. So have courage and do something different based off of what we talked about today. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. Go get involved in your communities, right? Find a way of having your voice being heard. Share best practices, that kind of thing. I think that's super important. So, but thank you again, Colleen, for it. But here's contact information. There's FNS. There's some resources I have back here for everybody, and even the things back here. Here's some really cool stuff that FNS put in there. Stoking white grievance, how to address it. I think that's really important. It's real. It's intentional. We've got to understand that in this country, at least, right? Marginalized communities. So, excuse me. There's a lot to this deck, and hopefully we did it some justice in 45 minutes or 40 minutes that we had together. But excuse me, and through my hiccups.
You did great, Eddie. Thank you so much. There were a lot of thank yous in the chat for how relevant, timely, actionable, useful. So thanks a ton. Thank you everybody for joining. So Kylie will share some information. We'll get that deck out and some of the other links that we covered. Thank you, Eddie, for being so generous and sharing your contact information as well. And yeah, just really glad folks were here and engaged and able to join us today. So thank you. And we
Laura
hope to.
too.
Hope to, yeah, Laura, I know. It was an actual Microsoft reunion for some of us who were there a couple decades back. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Eddie. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and I hope everyone has a fantastic afternoon.